Morning, everyone. This is Riham, AMEDA Secretary General, and I would like to warmly welcome you to our very first webinar that we are proudly holding in collaboration with Thomas Murray. Actually, I didn't find someone best than Thomas Mori to start our webinars with. Actually, they are creme de la creme. They are very professional, and I like how they are very experienced and have very wide knowledge around different segments of the world. So. This session, we are sharing this knowledge with not only AMEDA members, but we also invited some of the Egyptian community, financial institutions. We want them to benefit from the most recent cyber threats, how to overcome them, and I'm truly looking forward to a very rich and insightful session. I'm not sure if Miss Nermeen could join, but maybe she would join later. So over to you, Mr. Jim.
Thank you very much, Reham, for your very warm welcome. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, maybe if you're in a time zone where you've gone into the afternoon. My name is Jim Micklethwaite. I'm the Managing Director for Financial Market Infrastructure at Thomas Murray. We are very proud and delighted to be asked to present to you today in the first of a series of webinars being run by AMEDA. We welcome all AMEDA members that are joining, as well as the Egyptian capital market stakeholders and intermediaries that are joining us as well today. Just by way of introduction then, so myself, I look after the side of the business at Thomas Murray where we're looking at post-trade market risks, particularly within CSDs, CCPs and other financial market infrastructures. We also look at intermediaries in the custody value chain as well. So we monitor custodian banks and other intermediaries as well. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Shreeji Doshi, who's our Director for Governance, Risk and Compliance in the cyber practice, and by Ben Hawkins, who's a Senior Analyst within our cyber risk practice as well. If I just give you a very brief introduction, if you don't know Thomas Murray, we've been around for just over 30 years now. We've been specialists in terms of securities services, practices and advisory and risk. That's been our main business. We're headquartered in London, but we have offices elsewhere in the world. And we have a broad client base, mainly large financial institutions. And our main businesses are in 5 pillars, as you can see on this slide. So we have the capital markets part, which is my side. We are supporting major global custodians with their network management, so looking at their counterparty agent banks. We have a funds practice, and the main growth area that we've been experiencing in the last 3 or 4 years is around cyber, and that's definitely what we want to focus on going forward, because we see cyber as the preeminent threat to the orderly operations of banks, financial markets going forward. Okay. So if we just skip to the next slide. Briefly, this is our client base. We have about 130 clients. They're split across global banks and market infrastructure, the buy side, and then particularly with the cyber practice and our third-party risk monitoring, we've been supporting other organizations in various different industry sectors. So if we go through to the main focus of today's webinar then, and please, if you do have any questions as we go along, please drop them into the Q&A chat. We will leave some time at the end of the webinar to be able to answer your questions, so please feel free to post those as we go along. And without further ado, I shall pass over to you, Shreeji.
Yep. Amazing. Thank you, Jim. Before I get going, Ben, do you want to just do like a very quick introduction for yourself? And then
Sure. Thanks, Shreeji.
My name is Ben Hawkins. I am responsible for a lot of the technical delivery that goes on within the cyber department. So everything from penetration testing, red teaming, and a good degree of GRC work with Shreeji. And I do a lot of the kind of data analytics piece for the cyber department as well. So that's kind of my bread and butter.
Amazing. Thanks, Ben. You will hear a lot from Ben and Jim during the course of this presentation. It wouldn't be only me. I am a director within the cyber risk practice. Have a Big Four experience and have joined Thomas Murray nearly 2 years ago now, and it's been a very interesting journey. Lots of learnings, especially with the background of Thomas Murray in the capital markets. And I warmly welcome on this webinar where we look to share our experiences, our understanding. As Jim mentioned, we have an eye on the questions. If there is something that we can pick up immediately, I will do that, or we have a slot for the question and answers. We appreciate that you would have questions. Do share them because it makes the webinar a bit more interesting for us. So a quick high level agenda of what we're going to do. I'm going to start off with something that most people on this call, I assume, would not have experienced, purely because they are not part of the cyber team. I would want to give you on how threat actors either operate with their MO, or once they have executed their task, how do they communicate. So it is to give you real life feel of the cyber team's operations. And then we move on to a more broader threat landscape where we'll try to synthesize how we are processing the cyber threat landscape, and specifically in the context of CSDs. We then leverage our Thomas Murray's understanding of the AMEDA organization's landscape, FMIs, to give an overview of what we are seeing based on Orbit Security, which is an external attack surface tool, and what Jim and his team have processed from the various risk assessments they have undertaken. It's just to benchmark it, and then from there on, we share how we believe the cyber risk management is evolving, and some of the key takeaways from our side. So, which is the number one threat? If you have comments, questions, you can put it on the questions box also. What do you understand is the most common threat vector that we see in the market? Like, what is it that you would kind of relate to? Is there any takers on that? If you are thinking phishing, it's indeed phishing, and this is a real cyber threat actor fish. So a real actor looking to fish someone. It will give you this sort of message. It looks very, very realistic. They're trying to get information from you, uh, and this is typically done when they believe, they see a lot of LinkedIn activity that you do on your official LinkedIn. They would then identify you as a soft target. The idea that the threat actor has is to exploit human vulnerability of getting something, or putting you into pressure. And this happens to the best of cyber folks, to regular business operations people. uh, so this is one example. This is another example, which is on the Netflix ones. Now you would assume that there is nothing related to your organization. It is asking for your personal, something related to your personal stuff. Even though could be a personal stuff, but Ben could vouch that there could, once you click on something, it can, you are in a position to lose out your corporate credentials also. So even though a phishing may be for something which is, you associate at a personal level, you could technically leak organizational data, right? So this is something that we saw phishing. Why do you think it's so popular? Any takers on that? You could also submit your responses on the QR code. Well, if you have clicked on the QR code, unfortunately, you should not have. This is why it remains so popular. Again, like I said, it works on exploiting human psyche. But it's like a marketing thing. So it forces, or advertisement, where it forces you to and we have a response which is people who are curious or interested to explore. Yeah, so it's the human thing, and hence it is very popular. uh, Now what happens when a threat actor is able to successfully fish and then able to achieve its objective? One of the objective could be ransomware. This is an actual ransomware note from a threat actor. uh, Very interestingly, I don't know whether you've seen this before. It works like a proper organization, where the threat actor has posted, you know, that they have encrypted it. That if you report it, they will they also offer is something free of charge. So proof of that they're having data. So they will ask you, okay, we can give you 3 decrypted files of sorts. uh, to a certain extent, they also do a lot of tech support. A very interesting thing is that you see Tor browser. So when these threat actors are operating, they are operating not from a regular Microsoft Edge, Chrome, or Firefox browsers. They have a very specific Tor browser that is used for something called as an onion link. So that is how they communicate. It helps them remain anonymous. Pen, anything for you to add on this?
Nothing at the moment, no. Thanks, Shreeji.
Yep. So again, the idea is to give you an example of what we see regularly, and this is something that an actual negotiation between a threat actor and an organization. So typically, when this attack happens, it is usually on a Friday evening. So because Saturday Sundays are technically off, you necessarily do not have the means to respond to them immediately. The goal is to put you in pressure, that you pay the money now. And organizations typically take support of external help when they are negotiating. They don't do it themselves. There are specialized firms who do this. uh, but it's a cat and a mouse game where everyone is trying to negotiate an agreeable fee. The first step is to determine whether indeed the threat actor has breached your network and does have your data. And then how do you get that data back or stop them from releasing into the wild? uh, so this is a typical example. In this example, wild guess how much was paid? Anyone? Around $2 million. So this is after negotiation, like a full support team, where they will help you, walk you through the process of decrypting the data, getting validations if something is not working. So everything, you could go back. So again, the idea was to give you real examples
Shreeji,
of
can I ask you?
yes.
I'll ask a question. What kind of proportion of organizations would end up paying, roughly? And how
Uh,
many would kind of try and tough it out and see if they can kind of expunge the threat themselves without paying?
Yeah, I think initially it was the case where a lot of organizations started paying. There was a what are the regulatory implications were not sure. So, for example, now there is a clear guidance that you should not be paying ransomware. I think in UK recently announced it. Where initially I would err in the word of caution, but it is more than half that would have gone ahead and paid uh, uh, the ransom. um, and yeah, it again depends on what sort of cyber threat actors is. So the negotiating firms that that usually provide services on these firms, they have expertise on a specific cyber threat actor group. So for them, they have their characteristics of how much they would negotiate it, at what point they would kind of get pissed off. It's a cat and mouse games. Every organizations have different appetite. They have to speak to their insurers. They have to speak with their law firm. So there are a lot of decision making bodies that get involved before deciding to pay and what amount. But it's a very interesting experience for someone sitting outside, not for the organizations that are dealing with this, honestly.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, moving on very quickly on the cyber threat landscape. So this is a view of where we see the most number of attacks, and the ones that you would typically associate is the West. So towards US, UK, Europe. Again, hands to heart, there is a lot of data available from a point of view of how many attacks have occurred within the West. There is not much data available for attacks that have occurred in the global South, if you will, though because of regulatory pressure. Data so might be skewed, we don't know, unfortunately, but the point is, generally the trend is that geopolitics plays a huge part in the cyber threat landscape of the organization, a significant part, and the industry. So these are the two most driving factors of the cyber threat landscape. So if you place yourself as an organization of a country, that country's geopolitics will drive. And the second thing is what industry is an element of getting an assessment done from that point of view to establish your cyber threat landscape. So this is a view where, again, if you look, it is more West. But traditionally, we've seen also attacks on the global side. So, for example, in India, in China, there are also a number of incidents that have been recorded through various adversaries, and in the Middle East also. Now, again, like I said, geopolitics plays a huge part of it. So in this year, or I think starting from end of last year, we've seen significant growth of attacks in public administration. So and in public administration, it can be anything. I think that is something, a trend that we've seen, and no surprises, financial services is in the second most targeted industry. So the notion is that these are all known incidents, where still the numbers are coming up very high. Now, if we take the notion of non-reported incidents, or the attempts of cyber attack, that if we factor in, I think it will skew again a bit, because it depends on how mature the organization is in protecting and detecting the organization. So this is with the view of what known incidents we are aware of, and financial services, it's on the second most. So in summary, what I want to get to is that CSDs and the financial market infrastructure um, are being constantly attacked. Only the known cyber incidents are what we report here. So your cyber teams, your organization cyber teams are constantly protecting your organization. It's a never ending cat and mouse game between the cyber threat actors and the organizations.
Can I add something there, Shreeji?
Yeah.
Just interesting point that you made earlier about the geopolitics of a country causing attacks. Well, that big spike we see in public administration generally is those geopolitical attacks. So it's more about defacement and reputation damage, whereas the attacks against financial institutions are almost exclusively financially motivated. So they're looking for ransoms, they're looking for stolen data, and so on. So although finance is in the second position for number of attacks, the financial damage of those attacks is much more significant than in public administration.
Indeed, indeed. And some of the examples I've listed over here. Now, again, if I look at financial market infrastructure, I think they have a very peculiar, and it's true for CSDs also. It's the interconnected nature of them, meaning that that we don't see in any other industries as such. That such a level of interconnectedness of IT systems exists. Uh, so if in your interconnectized nature of, let's say, that's the supply chain, that supply chain uh, could act as a threat vector to make a target to your financial market infrastructure organization. So, and then there is a host of controls that determine whether how likely that could happen or not. So that's one aspect of it, and the other aspect is, because of the interconnected nature, if one of the supply chains organizations get attacked, there is an impact, an operational impact on the CSDs to some level of degree. Um, I think I've listed four of the most prominent attacks that we see in the FMI ecosystem, or that have impacted the FMI ecosystem. I think the first one, the most noted one, or it's a bit 2-3 years earlier, but somewhere in 2022, the CSDL, which is the depository in India, had a ransomware attack or a malware attack, thereby pausing the settlement activities, which I think is possibly the biggest cyber risk from a CSD point of view. If you're not able to settle within the regulatory timeframes, that is not good for that market, for that capital market, if you will. The second one is on the derivative platforms, where trading information was withheld, and matching of transaction on London Stock Exchange was, Metal Exchange LME was not possible because of a ransomware attack on Ion Markets, which is in Dublin. uh, Moscow Stock Exchange. Now, this is something again very linked to the geopolitical natures. It is allegedly that this was done from a proactive nature of from the Ukraine side, that there was a DDoS attack on the Moscow Stock Exchange. Now, DDoS attack is where it's basically, if your organization has a one gate where you can pass one person at 1 second, you basically send 300 people down that gate to block that gate out. So that's sort of DDoS net attack, meaning that your services are not usable because of the very huge traffic. ICBC's treasury operations were impacted, which became the custody BNY's issue, as they were the settlement agent for the treasury securities. So again, the point that we are trying to make is, on the cyber threat landscape, and to summarize before we get into the details of how AMEDA organizations have operated, is it's a continuous cat and mouse games between the cyber team and the cyber threat vectors. Even though there might not be prominent cyber known attacks in the FMI space, there were few which are very notable. It's a constant battle between these two. Uh,
Just to reiterate that as well. So in the World Federation for CSD conference a couple of years ago, I was on the panel with one of the main cyber guys from DTC, and he was saying they were just continuously being attacked and hundreds of times a day. And it's really only down to the very robust protections that they had in place that it didn't have a more impactful result on the US market. And that was primarily geopolitically driven. From their analysis, it was coming out of Russia and some of the other kind of geopolitical threat actors.
All right. Now, I think again the idea was not to scare, but give you the flavor of the reality. We'll come down to what we believe is a way to manage this risk. But before we jump to that, I think a quick analysis of the orbit security from the AMEDA's CSDs. Ben, before we jump to that, also if you could just what is orbit security for the audience?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Shreeji. So Thomas Murray has a in-house custom tool that we built called Orbit Security, which you've heard mentioned and you will hear mentioned again. What it is a tool for monitoring your external attack surface. So it's looking at anything you might have exposed to the internet. That might be servers, it might be services, it might be cloud infrastructure, whatever it might be. So what happens is you or indeed we provide a domain name associated with your business, and the tool goes away with a combination of machine learning and AI to identify as much infrastructure, as many servers and so on that are exposed on the internet from your organization. Looking at all those servers, it then tries to identify what services are running. So whether it's a web server or a SSH or whatever it might be, any service that's running on the internet. It then looks again for vulnerabilities associated with those services and their particular patch levels. It then takes all this information that it has and wraps it up into a single score. So a 0 to 1,000 score. And the idea is that you can not only compare against other businesses. So you could say my score is 700, your score is 600. So I'm doing better overall on my cyber posture, but also track it over time. So this process happens once a week or once every other week, depending on the configuration. And then so you can see your score changing over time as vulnerabilities are identified or indeed remediated. So one thing that Orbit allows us to do for a community such as AMEDA, is look at all the scores kind of on an average keel. Yes, Shreeji.
Just just to kind of explain the concept of orbit security in how we my colleague likes to explain is a thief trying to attack an house and doing reconnaissance before it does the act. So it just identifies, okay, there is a lock in a door, but I don't see a camera. So it's just those reconnaissance piece so that is what orbit security is in the context of digital infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks, Shreeji. That's a concise way of putting it. What is interesting about the tool for me as a technical tester is this is the kind of activity I would do if I was trying to break into a business. So this is exactly what an attacker would do prior to breaking in, is look at all these things that open the doors and windows and so on. So as I was saying, one thing that we can do is look at the community as a whole, and also look at the global average. So we cover many tens of thousands of organizations. And that allows us to see what a normal score looks like over the whole set that we have. AMEDA in general, on average, is doing slightly less well than the global average. It's not wildly significant, but it is slightly lower. 33 entities within AMEDA are doing quite poorly in the 0 to 1,000 rating. What that means is that there are issues with the external infrastructure that have fixes available. So this score does not mean you are forever a target. It just means right now there are issues with the configuration. On the other end of the scale, there's 5 entities who are doing phenomenally well, scores that we wouldn't expect to see, in any community, much less one with financial institutions in it, which tend to have more external infrastructure and therefore struggle to keep high scores. But indeed, some over 900, which is some of the highest we have on the entire platform. So that's a positive message to end this slide on. So the other way to cut data is to look at the types of businesses that exist within the community, and this allows us to then see which type of industry is performing well and which is performing slightly less well. What you can see from the analysis we've done here is that regulators within the AMEDA community are performing less well than the community as a whole. But then on the other end of the scale, the CCPs are performing even better than the global average. So what we're saying here that the CCPs are actually outperforming expectations fairly significantly. I won't hold us on that, just as we're trying to keep for time.
Well, I would just say, I mean, obviously for the AMEDA community, which is the CSD community, you can see that you're not necessarily the weakest link in your markets, and that's exactly
Not
why
at
we
all.
kind of broadened the analysis to look at all of the stakeholders in the market. So I would say good luck trying to talk to your regulator about about their cyber resilience, but it just does give you some background as to who the weakest links in the markets generally are, and it's not necessarily the CSDs or the CCPs.
It's a great point, Jim. In fact, the CSDs are almost on par with the global average. So that's a good message because on par is positive. This slide I'll move through fairly quickly, but ultimately, in most communities, what we see is, and indeed we see it here to a degree, is that these smaller organizations measured by how much external exposure they have in terms of the number of servers they have on the internet, the number of cloud infrastructure points that they have. So the smaller organizations tend to perform less well against Orbit benchmarks, largely due to having a smaller cybersecurity team, less budget for pouring into this kind of stuff. And indeed, we see that here. So the smaller organizations do tend to perform less well, but it's not a significant pattern. So across this community, there are vulnerabilities existing in entities of all sizes. So it's not just an issue that persists for the smaller organizations. It is in fact an issue for everyone. So just one other way to cut it, which is an interesting view we have on the Orbit data, is we can see where infrastructure is. The reason for highlighting this slide ultimately is to say that the infrastructure is where we expect it to be for your community. So it is mostly in Africa, with the kind of a large proportion in the Middle East as well. Point for raising it really is this allows us to keep an eye on where infrastructure is. So we've had other clients who have, they might have government, their data is in North America, for example, which is going against those regulatory requirements. So it's worth highlighting this just to prove that it is exactly where you expect it to be and not outside.
Ben, can I ask a question? So I mean,
Please, Jim.
with the greater use of cloud and being more acceptable, particularly within financial services as a kind of alternative infrastructure, do we expect the kind of geography to change in terms of how servers are going to be distributed for organizations?
It's an interesting question.
And what kind of impact do you think that would be?
So it's an interesting question. And it depends on the sophistication of the people deploying the cloud infrastructure. So you can put a server on AWS, and if you're just setting it up without any knowledge, you might accidentally put it in an AWS server farm in the USA. But nowadays, most cloud infrastructure providers will provide relatively local infrastructure for you to deploy onto. So moving to cloud does not necessarily imply that data is being whisked off to North America or to Europe or to wherever else. It is a potential consequence for moving to cloud, but it needn't be a requirement.
Yeah, and then this obviously talks to data sovereignty regulations that there are still in many markets which prohibit sensitive data to be held offshore. So that's something to be careful of when choosing a cloud provider, as Ben points out.
Precisely, yeah. And we had one instance with another client where there was a server in a country they didn't expect, and we looked into it, and their third-party provider had moved where their server was hosting data, and so there was a breach of contract there as well. So, Orbit allows us to keep an eye on those things to make sure that changes aren't being made by third parties to your infrastructure. That's one of the advantages that we have with Orbit. So on the most granular side of Orbit security, you have your company, you have the domains that that company owns, so www.thomasmurray.com or whatever it might be. With each of those domains, we have services, so whether it's web or email or whatever it might be. And then going all the way down to the bottom of that pyramid, there are vulnerabilities associated with those services. So we can roll those up and see what the kind of general patterns are. In the community we're talking about AMEDA, there are a fairly significant number of vulnerable services, by which I mean there are services exposed to the internet that have known exploits. So if an attacker were to identify these services, they could match up the service and the exploit, put those together and gain some sort of access. There are a few that I would describe as critical within that group. In fact, we may not on public webinar, but try and inform the relevant parties that those vulnerabilities exist because they are of a critical nature. So lots of vulnerable services. The next biggest category, these open services, so stuff that is exposed that perhaps shouldn't be. It's a bit of a gray area because some industries and some companies have services exposed that other people wouldn't by necessity. So those are slightly less critical. And then a handful of what we call compromised servers, or potentially compromised servers is the actual nomenclature, because they are servers where they're conducting activity that perhaps we wouldn't expect of a corporate server. So I won't go into the detail of what that means, but they are doing things on the internet that we wouldn't normally see a corporate server doing. So worth a look. Again, we'll reach out with details if that affects you. So quick summary. I don't want to hold too much time. On average, entities within AMEDA are performing slightly below par as compared with the global average. That, again, is not a permanent problem. That is a fixable problem. Regulators performing significantly under the average. Majority of the infrastructure is where we expect it. Great. And there are several significant vulnerabilities in the community, I should say, some of which are critical, as we mentioned. So overall, slightly below average, but aside from some critical vulnerabilities, nothing major to panic about. I think I'll hand back to you, Shreeji.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. Just in the interest of the time, we've kind of summarized the data that Jim and his team has gathered on the FMI risk and assessments. You would have the slides. I think just the quick summary I would like to draw is what we think important is couple of points in whatever has been shared is cyber not being its own team, or there being a single officer. That is something that we would recommend in the cyber threat landscape. Have someone who's dedicatedly looking at cyber, so that there is sufficient time given to address the risk, identify the risk and dealing with that risk. So that is something that we would recommend on the resourcing side of things. The other is on the penetration testing. Now we do have a number of not disclosed, which is fine, but even within the disclosed, we see most of it being annual. So if I cumulatively look at not disclosed and annual, it is upwards of 70%, which we believe is not appropriate for the cyber threat landscape we are in. We would recommend that the pen testing is more frequent, so that organizations are able to identify the critical issues that Ben was alluding to in that our Orbit security tool gathered. Those are identified, and then organizations have the opportunity to remediate them. So the short message is, reconsider the resourcing. Have at least someone dedicated from a cyber point of view and a bit senior to drive, to look at the landscape externally, and also contextualize internal business operations, so that appropriate cyber initiatives can be undertaken, and at a minimum conduct more frequent penetration testing, as that is very, very important to identify uh, what could be exploited and then remediate them.
Shreeji, is there kind of an optimal frequency for pen testing, balancing sort of cost?
Yeah.
Because it's obviously expensive exercise for smaller groups,
Yeah.
particularly.
So how we would recommend is to, again, this is not with the context of the scope. So what we've typically seen is organizations limit the scope to 1 year. So we would recommend that at least the critical assets are covered quarterly or biannually, at least the critical assets, and an ongoing vulnerability scanning, so that you don't have to wait for penetration testing, but also vulnerability identifying is a bit more easier and not expensive task. So quarterly vulnerability scannings and at least weekly vulnerability scannings and at quarterly penetration testing is something that we would recommend on critical assets, at least. And the preventing control, again, we see this, which is great on what organizations have implemented. This is a good representative. There are additional controls that we believe are getting more and more critical, and that is something that we'll speak about going down on a couple of slides, because we are at 48. We have exactly 12 minutes, and I want to still give the opportunity for people to ask questions. Jim, over to you. I think if you could give a view of, from a CSD point of view, what being involved in the FMI space for this long, how do you see the risk from a cyber?
Yeah, so I'll say very quickly. I mean, obviously the CSD sits at the center of a very complex interconnected ecosystem, which has multiple kind of controls around the transaction flow and messaging, which in and of itself makes them quite difficult to attack from a financially motivated perspective, in terms of trying to steal assets effectively, and obviously where assets are registered and not bearer, that does also provide a protection. The main threat, as we've been talking about, is really around disruption in operations and ransomware attached to that. And effectively, because of that very intricate connectivity, that threat can come from a third party within that ecosystem. There are a lot of markets within AMEDA which operates beneficial owner accounting. So obviously that data is extremely sensitive and could be held to ransom, effectively encrypted and held to ransom. And then also we have a high number of normal corporations which are connected into the infrastructure because they are issuers. And many of the depositories running central registers will have hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations connected into their systems. So what we can see is a very kind of potentially vulnerable kind of system. And I always say, I think, and probably we've seen this in the graphic in relation to the geopolitical drivers, is that this region, and certainly the CSD community, have been able to kind of fly under the radar in terms of threat actors for many years. But the potential for disruption and potential for financial impact to the market, if it disrupts operations, is very, very significant. Okay, so maybe to go to the next slide. Thank you, Shreeji. And regulators are not ignorant of the threat, and the work that's been done by the regulators over the last sort of 10 years or so have resulted in a number of initiatives. Regulation has come through in Europe with the Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA. We also have regulation in Australia and Canada. and we have frameworks in other markets as well. And all of these have commonalities in terms of forcing organizations, and obviously it's all financial institutions typically, to embody cyber resilience in their enterprise risk management framework. So it's a critical part of their normal ERM frameworks. They should be running testing and simulations and have a plan, obviously, to be able to respond to any incident. And the other main part of it is also transparency as well. So there are some requirements in many of these frameworks and regulations for reporting, some of which are more stringent than others. And one of the key threats within the whole cyber environment is lack of transparency, meaning that threat actors can use the same kinds of attacks, the same attack vectors for multiple organizations over and over and over again, because organizations that have been successfully attacked don't want to admit to it for reputational reasons, and that just plays into the attacker's hands. Okay. So regulation is very much driven out of the developed markets, but it's certainly coming down into the developing markets as well. And we're seeing regulators everywhere starting to put in some quite stringent requirements. Okay.
Yeah. Indeed, Jim, I think I can vouch for it. I've been tracking the regulations in various markets. It's indeed that. And I think you touch upon a very important point on information sharing, and we come to why it is important. But before I jump to that, very quickly, how we've seen cyber risk management evolve from a traditional point of view is it is always driven by new technical capabilities. So as there are more tools available in the market, organizations have started adopting them. So that reduces a bit the risk. uh, they have looked to improved governance, awareness, and competency as they evolve. So this is, and improve the processes around it, also align with the regulatory requirements that Jim was highlighting to. Now, this all is centered around what we have known traditional best practices. So you may have heard the use of ISO 27001 or ISA 3000, for example. Now, all these best practices enable organizations to do add more technical capabilities in a structured framework way. Now, what we have seen now organizations pivot to is what we call as cyber threat intelligence driven risk management. Now, I'll just take a couple of minutes to set that up. So, in the cyber threat landscape, we all need a language to speak about. So, in the context of cyber threat intelligence, there is this framework called MITRE ATT&CK, that any cyber attack that has taken place is put together on what we call a cyber kill chain, and it enables to use the same language to denote how the attack has undertaken, that we call as TTPs. So what were the tools used, what were the tactical procedures used? So those are TTPs in nature. So the reason for doing cyber threat landscape at the very beginning is what we believe is very critical in understanding which threat actor is going to attack you and how they're going to attack you, right? And then you contextualize with the risk, which is the business which Jim was alluding to in the previous slides, from a CSD point of view, interconnected nature of it, settlement being not able to settle being the major impact through a cyber scenario. That all needs to be contextualized in what the cyber threat intelligence is saying, and then you map that to what we know of the various control frameworks that are put that we highlighted before. So the idea is now there is more and more focus into understanding uh, who's going to attack you. That is the most important thing, and hence it is paramount it becomes imperative for organizations to share that information. So the more the sharing happens, the greater is the likelihood that organizations will be able to equip themselves to manage the risk in a community fashion. And that is what I think Jim was alluding to, is that a constant challenge that has been there in the cyber threat, in the cyber environment, is lack of information, and hence the regulations are now pushing towards more incident disclosures and even cyber threat information. In the context of DORA, there is that requirement, because it enables to organization to determine who might want to attack your organization, which attacks are the most likely to be conducted, how are they going to conduct, what is the business impact they're going to do it, and thereby you have to determine what you need to do in order to first prevent that attack, and if for whatever reason the attack was successful, how are you going to reduce the impact by various aspects of detection engineering and response categories. So in summary, the cyber risk management in the current cyber threat landscape, and not just for CSD, it is imperative to be cyber threat intelligence based. What changes in the context of CSDs are the interconnected natures, and hence a community level approach of managing that risk by information sharing. That is something that we believe is how the industry should move forward, and hopefully would move forward. These are some of the baseline recommendations from a controls point of view. And Amer Salim, I think in order for to respond these questions, what we believe are there are some mandatory baseline cybersecurity controls that every organization should have at operating almost effectively all the time. Is multi-factor authentication, what we call endpoint detection and response, EDR, patching and vulnerability management, so the things that we spoke about on penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, encryption of data, segregation of networks. So that's at the technical side of it. Then you have the human aspect of it, which is uh, spreading awareness for people to appreciate what the cyber risk is, because it's a complex thing. It's not like your traditional risk where the understanding of it is relatively straightforward. So anything like a regulatory risk, if you're non-compliant, you have a regulatory risk. Now cyber risk is more nuanced, more layers to it. So you need constant information on that. Having policy procedures, four eyes principles, employee weighting, and then the last piece is find mechanisms to share information. So I know there is something called as an FS ISAC, which is one of the standard bodies or associations that have collaborated to share this information on cyber threat landscape. Membership to that is a bit prohibitive from a cost point of view, but it is an initiative where such information can be shared in a way, and possibly for AMEDA to look at on how they can support such an initiative of sharing the information in a way where it is does not violate the secrecy or the data security concerns, but enable for a community based uh, risk management part of it. So Amir Salem, just those were the key baseline controls that an SME can put in order to to manage the risk. Key takeaways. Uh, I know we are at the top of the hour. My apologies. There are just two questions. I will not, because I've spoken about it from a point of view of key takeaways, and then I leave the floor to Ben and Jim. There were two questions uh, about are there specific sectors within the financial markets that are more vulnerable to cyber attacks than other? If so, why? The vulnerable part of the financial markets is difficult to say, because it depends on the controls. So it does not necessarily mean that if you are in one sector, you are more vulnerable. What changes is the likelihood. So how likely and a financial market entity is gonna get attacked, and that for that we use the model of understanding what countries you operate in, and how geopolitics influence it, and then looking at what kind of threat actors operate. So that will give you the likelihood on that. Vulnerability is difficult to judge purely because it's on how controls are implemented at an entity level. There's one more question which there are multiple controls. Uh, Marwa has asked what are the most effective protection tools against data breaches. Where it's not just tools because it requires people, process, technology. What we believe are important technical components is what we shared in the slide before. Uh, uh, then, Jim, any other questions that
So just looking at them, I was looking at them in order they came through. So Amra Selim asked, how can SMEs cope with evolving threats despite limited financial resources? So that was a key question for smaller markets, maybe.
Yeah, I think the response to that would be baseline controls. So ensure that the baseline controls operate effectively, and we've highlighted what we believe at a technical people level are baseline controls uh, to manage this risk. Now, if the resources are limited, I think there is one-time exercise of assessing the cyber threat landscape that you operate in, and then determining what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think as we mentioned, the human element is still the most vulnerable part, and that can be addressed through training and internal testing exercises that can be done quite cheaply. So it's not necessarily an expensive exercise to deal with the key threat, which is your staff effectively clicking on links and so forth. Another question was about transparency as well in terms of sharing information. I think what we've said previously is that there is a real need to operate as a community to be able to share threats. And the question around how that can be done safely, I think that's an interesting one. I probably there will be a certs organization within your jurisdiction or a government organization that might run a kind of secure forum to be able to share attacks. Shreeji, anything else that you've seen?
Yeah, the FS-ISAC is a good example. So there's an organization called FS-ISAC which is doing that in the context of DORA. I'm happy to share the link on that. So they've found a way to kind of share information securely. Again, I think role of AMEDA could also be useful in this one.
Yeah. And I think just in the interest of time, we will take all of the remaining questions and we'll answer them after the seminar. So I think that will conclude for us. Thank you very much, Shreeji and Ben, for running through that exercise. We hope it was useful for everybody, and we hope that it's not scared you too much, but has actually been constructive in terms of how you can actually protect yourselves and what kind of key things to look for within the organization. So that concludes from us, and thank you very much. And we'll leave it to Namin to see us out.
Allow me to thank you also. Although I've connected a bit late, but I've been with you quietly in the background, letting our brilliant speakers take the lead. And I have to say, what a strong and insightful flow of sessions we've just had. From real-world threat actor tactics to the orbit security analysis and practical strategies, it's been a comprehensive tour of where we stand and what we need to do next. A big thank you to Shreeji and Jim and Ben. You've not only covered the technical side, but made it relatable and regionally relevant. Thank you again, and we hope to have more of this insightful sessions. And my apologies once again, although it was really, really interesting, and I hope very, very beneficial for all the people who shared. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good
Thank you,
rest of
everyone.
the day. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you all and see you around inshallah.